Open your legs, I will only stop when my child is in your womb. 70 years, rancher to the giant mail order bride. Magnolia Harsted's massive hands gripped the boulder she was trying to move when she felt him behind her. Silas Thornwood, the rancher whose telegram had been brutally honest. I need a woman strong enough to work this land and bear my children. I will not stop until my seed takes root in your womb. At 6'2" and broad as any man, she'd been called a giant, a freak, unwomanly by every suitor back east. But this Montana rancher had specifically requested her size, her strength, her capability. Now, as his calloused hands covered hers on the sun-warmed stone, helping her lift what she couldn't manage alone, Magnolia felt the heat of his body against her back and heard his voice drop to that same raw promise from his letter. Open your legs tonight, Magnolia. I will only stop when my child is in your womb. The words should have repulsed her, should have made her feel like livestock being bred. But instead, this giant mail-order bride felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest, because unlike every other man who'd recoiled from her size, Silas Thornwood pulled her closer, his strength matching hers, his need for her as primal as the Montana wilderness surrounding them. Together, they heaved the boulder aside. It rolled away with a dull thud that echoed across the ranch yard, and Magnolia stumbled backward into Silas's chest. His arms steadied her immediately, and she felt the iron strength in them, the kind of power that came from decades of breaking horses and wrestling cattle. She should have stepped away, should have remembered her place as the mail-order bride who'd arrived just 3 days ago, but his hands lingered on her waist, burning through the thin fabric of her work dress, and when she turned to face him, the look in his eyes made her breath catch in her throat. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Silas said quietly. His face was weathered from sun and wind, handsome in that rugged way that made her stomach flip. "I already know what you're capable of." "Do you?" Magnolia's voice came out rougher than she intended. "Because Philadelphia told me I was incapable of being a real woman, that my size made me. Philadelphia was full of fools." His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, and she hated how she leaned into that touch like a starving woman offered bread. Every single man who let you go was a coward who couldn't handle a woman with real strength. Magnolia felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She'd cried enough over the years, cried when boys in school called her names, cried when her fiancé, tall, handsome Robert Ashford, had left her at the altar, his face twisted with disgust as he'd whispered loud enough for the first 3 pews to hear. "I can't marry a woman who makes me feel small. It's unnatural." "I'm not fragile," she said, lifting her chin. "I don't need gentle words or careful handling." "Good." Silas's smile was slow, predatory. "Because I don't have gentle in me, Magnolia. Not when it comes to what I want, and I want you carrying my child by spring." The bluntness should have offended her, should have made her feel reduced to nothing more than a breeding mare. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not at her body as an object, but at her whole self as something precious and necessary, that made her pulse race. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have chosen any woman, someone smaller, more delicate, more likely to die in childbirth." Silas's voice hardened. "More likely to break under the weight of Montana winters. I buried one wife already, Magnolia. Sweet little thing, barely 5 feet tall, pretty as a painted doll. She lasted 2 years before this land killed her. Lost 3 babies before they even quickened. I won't watch another woman waste away because she wasn't built for survival." His hands tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Magnolia gasped at the solid heat of his body. She could feel every hard plane of muscle, every ridge of scarred strength, and lower, pressed against her belly, she felt the evidence of his desire, urgent, undeniable, terrifying in its intensity. "I need a woman who can match me," Silas continued, his voice dropping to gravel. "Who can work beside me, fight beside me, build something that lasts. You're that woman, Magnolia. I knew it the moment I saw your photograph, the way you stood in that picture, shoulders back, chin up, daring the camera to judge you. That's the mother I want for my children." Something cracked open in Magnolia's chest. All her life she'd been too much, too tall, too broad, too strong, too loud, too ambitious. Every man who'd courted her had tried to shrink her down, to make her apologize for the space she took up in the world. But Silas Thornwood looked at her like she was exactly enough, like she was everything he needed. "Tonight," he said, and it wasn't a question. "After supper, in our bedroom. I meant what I wrote in that telegram, Magnolia. I will not stop until my child grows in your womb." Her throat went dry. Their bedroom. He'd given her the master bedroom on her first night here, moved his things in without asking permission, as if her acceptance of his proposal meant acceptance of everything that came with it. She'd lain awake those first 2 nights, listening to him breathe in the darkness, terrified and thrilled in equal measure, waiting for him to reach for her, but he'd kept to his side of the bed, giving her time to adjust, time to choose. Now, standing in the brutal honesty of Montana sunlight with his hands on her body and his intentions crystal clear, Magnolia realized her time had run out, and God help her, she didn't want more time. She wanted exactly what he was offering, this raw, honest claiming, this promise that she was woman enough, strong enough, worthy enough to bear his children and share his life. Yes, she breathed. And then, because she needed him to understand that she was choosing this, choosing him, she rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. The kiss was fire and desperation. Silas groaned against her lips, one hand fisting in her hair while the other splayed across her lower back, pressing her impossibly closer. Magnolia had been kissed before, chaste, apologetic kisses from men who seemed embarrassed to want her. But this was different. This was a man who kissed like he meant to devour her, to claim every inch of her, to make absolutely certain she understood what she'd agreed to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "Tonight," he repeated, "and every night after until you're swollen with my baby." Magnolia nodded, unable to form words. Her whole body felt electrified, alive in a way she'd never experienced. But as Silas stepped back, his eyes dark with promise, she caught movement in the corner of her vision. Someone was watching from the barn, a tall, thin man with a face twisted in calculation and rage. "Who is that?" she asked. Silas followed her gaze and his jaw tightened. "Cornelius Thornwood, my nephew. He's been circling this ranch like a vulture for 5 years, waiting for me to die so he can inherit everything." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "That's why I need an heir, Magnolia. If I die without a legitimate child, everything I've built, this land, this legacy, goes to that whiskey-soaked wastrel. I'll burn it all to ash before I let that happen." The weight of what he was asking her, what she'd agreed to, settled over Magnolia like a physical thing. She wasn't just his mail-order bride. She was his last chance, his final gamble against time and death, and the nephew who wanted him to fail. And suddenly, the urgency in his telegram made perfect sense. He wasn't just asking her to bear his children, he was asking her to save everything he'd spent his life building. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. Silas's smile was grim. "My lawyer says I have 6 months to produce a legitimate heir, or Cornelius can contest the will on grounds that I'm too old to manage the ranch myself. 6 months, Magnolia. That's why I can't afford to be gentle, why I can't afford to wait. 6 months to conceive, carry, and prove she was pregnant. 6 months to become the wife, the mother, the legacy this ranch needed. The enormity of it should have terrified her. Instead, Magnolia felt something fierce and determined rise in her chest. She'd spent 28 years being told she was too much, not enough, wrong in every way that mattered. But here, in this brutal Montana wilderness, a man was asking her to be exactly what she was, strong, capable, built for survival. "Then we don't wait," she said firmly, "tonight and every night after, until your child, our child, makes certain that nephew of yours never touches this land." The look Silas gave her was pure hunger, mixed with something deeper, something that looked dangerously like respect, like partnership, like the beginning of something neither of them had expected when they'd agreed to this arrangement. But as they walked back toward the house, Magnolia couldn't shake the feeling of Cornelius's eyes boring into her back, couldn't forget the twisted rage on his face, and she wondered, not for the first time, what a desperate man might do to protect an inheritance he believed was rightfully his. The sun had set hours ago, and now Magnolia stood in the master bedroom, her hands shaking as she unpinned her hair. The mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, flushed cheeks, wide eyes, lips still swollen from that afternoon kiss. Downstairs, she could hear Silas moving through the house, checking locks, banking the fire. The familiar sounds of a man securing his home for the night. But tonight was different. Tonight, he would come upstairs. Tonight, the arrangement they'd made through telegraph wires and desperate letters would become flesh and blood reality. She'd changed into the nightgown Mrs. Jessup had left on the bed. Plain white cotton, nothing fancy, but clean and soft. It hung loose on her frame, and Magnolia hated how it made her look even larger, even more ungainly. She'd spent her whole life trying to take up less space, to somehow shrink the body that refused to cooperate with what the world expected of women. But Silas had chosen her specifically for this body, had written in that telegram that he needed her strength, her size, her capability. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her. What if Philadelphia had been right? What if the doctors who'd examined her after Robert's abandonment had been telling the truth when they said her body was malformed, incapable of carrying a child to term? What if she failed Silas the same way she'd failed every other person who'd ever expected anything from her? The bedroom door opened, and Silas stepped inside. He'd washed up. His hair was damp, his face freshly shaved, and he'd changed into clean denims and an unbuttoned work shirt that showed the muscled planes of his chest. At 42, he was in his prime, all raw masculine power and controlled strength, and the way he looked at her like she was water in the desert made Magnolia's mouth go dry. "You're thinking too much," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "I can see it in your face, all those doubts crowding in." Magnolia's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "What if I can't give you what you need? What if your body is perfect?" Silas crossed the room in 3 strides, and suddenly his hands were on her shoulders, solid and warm and certain. "Every inch of you is exactly what I asked for, what I need. Stop letting Philadelphia's poison live in your head." "It's not poison if it's true," she whispered. The doctors were wrong." His thumbs traced her collarbones through the thin nightgown, and she shivered. "You want to know how I know? Because I've spent 3 days watching you work. Watching you lift things that would break most men, watching you handle frightened horses and stubborn cattle like you were born to it. Your body isn't broken, Magnolia. It's built for survival, built for this land, built to carry my children and raise them strong." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "You don't know that. You can't promise." "I can promise that we'll try." Silas's voice gentled, and he wiped her tears away with calloused thumbs. "I can promise that I won't give up on you, won't turn away from you, won't make you feel less than worthy just because conception takes time. But Magnolia, you need to understand something." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I meant what I said this afternoon. I will not stop until my child is in your womb. That might mean tonight. That might mean 100 nights. But I will keep trying, keep claiming you, keep planting my seed until it takes root. And I need to know, right now, before we start this, that you can handle that kind of intensity, that kind of single-minded determination." Magnolia's breath came in short gasps. The rawness of his words, the absolute certainty in his voice, sent heat flooding through her body. She'd never been wanted like this, never been pursued with this kind of primal focus. Robert had approached their engagement bed like it was a duty, something to be endured, but Silas spoke of claiming her like it was his singular purpose, his reason for breathing. "I can handle it," she said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I'm stronger than you think." "I know exactly how strong you are." Silas's smile was slow, dangerous. "That's why I chose you. Now, take off that nightgown. I want to see what's mine." The command should have felt degrading, should have made her feel like property, like livestock being inspected before purchase. But the heat in Silas's eyes wasn't cold calculation, it was hunger, pure, undisguised wanting. And when Magnolia's shaking hands reached for the hem of her nightgown, when she pulled it over her head and stood before him completely bare, the sound that escaped his throat was somewhere between a groan and a prayer. "God Almighty," he breathed, "you're magnificent." No one had ever called her magnificent. Beautiful, maybe, in that backhanded way that implied she'd be prettier if she were smaller. Striking, occasionally, which always felt like a polite word for strange. But magnificent, that was a word for mountains, for storms, for forces of nature. And the way Silas looked at her, his eyes traveling over every curve and plane and angle of her body, made her feel exactly that powerful. "Come here," he said, his voice rough with need. And when she stepped into his arms, when she felt his hands span her waist and pull her against the hard heat of his body, Magnolia realized she was trembling, not with fear, with anticipation, with the bone-deep knowledge that everything was about to change. Silas kissed her slowly this time, thoroughly, like he had all the time in the world despite the urgency thrumming between them. His hands mapped her body with reverent attention, the breadth of her shoulders, the strong muscles of her back, the curve of her hips. Every touch said the same thing his words had. "You are exactly what I need. You are perfect. You are mine." When he backed her toward the bed, Magnolia went willingly. When he laid her down on the star quilt and stood over her, stripping off his own clothes with efficient movements, she felt her pulse hammer in her throat. He was all lean muscle and scarred skin, his body a testament to hard work and harder living. And when he settled his weight over her, when she felt the hot brand of his desire pressing against her thigh, the reality of what they were about to do hit her like a physical blow. "Silas," she whispered, "I've never, not like this, not with someone who actually wanted you?" He finished her sentence, and there was understanding in his eyes. "I know. That bastard who left you at the altar probably made you feel like he was doing you a favor just by touching you. But Magnolia, I need you to hear this." He lowered himself until they were nose to nose, until she could see every fleck of gold in his hazel eyes. "I am the one receiving the favor here. You came all the way to Montana to save my ranch, to give me the air I need, to build something lasting with a man you'd never met. That takes courage most people don't have. So when I touch you tonight, when I claim you and fill you and make you mine, remember, you're the gift, not me." The words broke something open in Magnolia's chest, some dam she'd built over years of rejection and shame. And when Silas kissed her again, when his hands parted her thighs with gentle insistence, when he whispered against her mouth, "Open your legs, beautiful girl. Let me give you what you came here for," she surrendered to it. To him. To the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where being too much was exactly enough. The joining was intense, overwhelming, nothing like the fumbling awkwardness she'd expected. Silas moved with purpose, with certainty, his body claiming hers in a rhythm as old as the Montana mountains surrounding them. And when Magnolia gasped his name, when her hands fisted in the sheets and her back arched off the bed, she felt something shift deep inside her. Not just physical pleasure, though there was plenty of that, but something fundamental, like a key turning in a lock, like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. "That's it," Silas groaned against her neck. "Take all of me, every inch. Show me how strong you are." And Magnolia did. She met him thrust for thrust, her body rising to his challenge, proving that she could handle his intensity, his determination, his absolute refusal to settle for anything less than complete possession. The bed creaked beneath them. The headboard knocked against the wall. Somewhere in the rational part of her brain, Magnolia knew Mrs. Jessup could probably hear them, knew the ranch hands in the bunkhouse might be placing bets on how long the old man could last, but she didn't care. Because for the first time in her life, she felt powerful in her own skin. Felt like the Amazon, the giant, the too much woman was exactly what someone needed. When release finally crashed over them both, when Silas buried himself deep and groaned her name like a benediction, Magnolia felt tears slip down her temples. Not from pain, from relief. From the overwhelming realization that maybe the doctors had been wrong, maybe her body wasn't broken, maybe she could give this man what he needed. Maybe she could finally be enough. Silas collapsed beside her, breathing hard, one arm thrown possessively across her waist. "We're not done," he said after a moment, and Magnolia felt him already stirring against her hip, ready for round two. "I meant what I said, Magnolia. I won't stop until your child is in my womb," she finished, turning to face him. "I know, and I won't ask you to stop." The smile he gave her was pure satisfaction. "Good. Because we've got 6 months to make this happen, and I plan to use every single night." They made love twice more before dawn, each time more intense than the last, and when Magnolia finally fell asleep in Silas's arms, her body deliciously sore and thoroughly claimed, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile, terrifying, precious hope that maybe this arrangement would become more than just a business transaction, that maybe the rancher who'd sent that brutally honest telegram might actually become something more, something like love. But in the darkness outside their window, Cornelius Thornwood watched the lamplight finally extinguish in the master bedroom, his hands clenched into fists. He'd heard everything, the rhythmic creaking, the gasps, the old man's stamina that shouldn't exist at his age. And Cornelius knew, with sinking certainty, that his uncle might actually succeed, might actually produce the heir that would strip Cornelius of everything he'd been counting on. He couldn't let that happen, wouldn't let some oversized mail-order bride steal his inheritance, which meant he needed to act fast, needed to find a way to ensure that even if Magnolia conceived, she'd never carry that baby to term. The thought should have bothered him, should have made him feel like the monster his uncle always accused him of being. But 5,000 acres of prime Montana ranch land was worth any price, even murder. 3 months had passed since that first night, and Magnolia stood in the ranch kitchen at dawn, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other gripping the edge of the wash basin as nausea rolled through her in waves. The smell of bacon grease from yesterday's supper still lingered in the air, and it made her stomach heave violently. She'd been sick every morning for 2 weeks now, retching into the slop bucket behind the barn where Silas wouldn't hear, terrified to hope, terrified to believe what her body was trying to tell her. She was late, 6 weeks late. Her breasts were tender, swollen, sensitive to even the softest touch of her nightgown. And the exhaustion, God, the exhaustion that hit her every afternoon like a physical blow, making her need to sit down even in the middle of mucking stalls or hauling water. She knew these signs, had read about them in the medical books her mother kept hidden in the Philadelphia house, the ones that explained what happened when a woman's body did what it was supposed to do. But Philadelphia's doctors had been so certain. "Your womb is tilted," they'd said after examining her following Robert's abandonment. "Your hips too narrow despite your size. Conception would be unlikely. Carrying to term nearly impossible. You should prepare yourself, Miss Harstead, for a life without children." She'd believed them, had built her entire understanding of herself around that diagnosis. And now her body was betraying everything she thought she knew, and the hope rising in her chest felt more dangerous than any threat Cornelius Thornwood could pose. The kitchen door creaked open, and Silas stepped inside, his hair wet from washing at the pump, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. 3 months of marriage had made him familiar. The way he moved through morning routines, the sound of his boots on the floorboards, the particular rough gentleness of his hands when he touched her in the darkness. But familiarity hadn't dimmed the intensity between them. If anything, it had grown stronger. Every night, true to his word, Silas claimed her with single-minded determination. Some nights were tender, almost reverent. Others were raw and desperate, both of them aware of time slipping away, of Cornelius circling closer, of the 6-month deadline approaching like a noose tightening around their necks. "You're pale," Silas said immediately, crossing to her. His hands framed her face, tilting it toward the weak morning light streaming through the window. "Are you sick? Should I send for the doctor?" "No," Magnolia's voice came out sharper than intended. "No doctors." Silas's eyes narrowed. He was too observant, had spent 3 months learning to read every shift in her expression, every tension in her body. "Maggie, what aren't you telling me?" The nickname still made her chest warm. He was the only person who'd ever shortened her name with affection rather than mockery. But right now, with her secret sitting heavy in, her belly and terror making her hands shake, she couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm late," she whispered, 6 weeks late, and I've been sick every morning, and I'm so tired I can barely stand by afternoon. But I won't let myself believe it's real until I'm certain, because if I'm wrong, if it's just my body playing tricks again—" Silas's hands dropped to her waist, then lower, splaying across her belly with reverent care. "You're pregnant. You don't know that. The doctors said. The doctors were fools." His voice was rough with emotion. "I can see it in your face, Maggie, in the way you're carrying yourself, in the glow of your skin. You're carrying my child." Magnolia felt tears spill over, hot and fast. What if I lose it? What if I make it to 3 months and then my body fails like they said it would? What if I can't? "Then we try again." Silas pulled her against his chest, and she felt his heart hammering beneath her cheek. "But Maggie, you need to hear me. I don't believe you're going to fail. I believe your body is doing exactly what it was built to do, and in 6 months, we're going to hold our baby and prove every single person who doubted you wrong." The certainty in his voice made her want to believe, made her want to surrender to the terrifying hope blooming in her chest. But before she could respond, before she could tell him about the flutter she thought she'd felt low in her belly last night, the sound of horses approaching made them both tense. Silas released her immediately, his hand dropping to the rifle he kept mounted by the kitchen door. "Stay inside," he ordered, already moving toward the front of the house. But Magnolia followed him to the window, her heart sinking as she recognized the 3 riders. Cornelius Thornwood sat tall in his saddle, flanked by 2 men she'd never seen before, one wearing a doctor's bag, the other carrying a leather satchel that marked him as a lawyer. "He knows," Magnolia breathed. "Somehow he knows." Silas's jaw tightened. "Then we deal with it, together." They stepped onto the porch as Cornelius dismounted with theatrical slowness, his smile sharp enough to cut. 3 months of watching and waiting had turned him gaunt, desperate. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame, and his eyes had the fevered brightness of a man who'd been drinking his breakfast. "Uncle Silas," he called out, spreading his arms in mock warmth, "and the lovely bride. How domestic you both look. How hopeful." "State your business or get off my land," Silas growled. "Business?" Cornelius's laugh was ugly. "I'm here as concerned family, Uncle. Concerned about your health, your capacity. The whole territory has been talking about your vigorous nightly activities with your giant bride here. But talk is cheap. Performance is what matters. And I've brought Dr. Whitmore and Lawyer Garrett to verify whether you've actually managed to fulfill the terms of your ridiculous will." The doctor dismounted, a thin man with cold eyes and colder hands. "Mr. Thornwood, if your wife is indeed with child, a simple examination would confirm. No one is examining my wife." Silas's voice dropped to something dangerous, and Magnolia saw his hand tighten on the rifle. "You have her word. You have mine. That's all the verification you're getting." "But is she actually pregnant?" Cornelius pressed, stepping closer. "Or is this just desperate hope from a desperate old man? Because by my calculations, Uncle, you have exactly 3 months left to produce a living heir, 3 months before this ranch becomes mine by default. And forgive me if I'm skeptical that your mail-order Amazon has actually conceived, given that proper Philadelphia doctors declared her barren." The words hit Magnolia like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face, felt her knees go weak. How did he know? How could he possibly know about Philadelphia, about the doctors, about the diagnosis that had shaped her entire understanding of herself? "I did my research," Cornelius continued, seeing her reaction. "Did you think I wouldn't investigate the woman my uncle imported to steal my inheritance? I know everything, Miss Harstead. Or should I say Mrs. Thornwood? Though for how much longer, I wonder. I know about Robert Ashford, about the humiliation at the altar, about the medical examination afterward that confirmed what everyone already suspected. You're not built for childbearing. You're built for hard labor, for working like a man. But carrying a baby?" He shook his head in mock sympathy. "That requires delicacy. Feminine qualities you simply don't possess." Silas moved like lightning. One moment he was on the porch, the next he had Cornelius by the throat, the rifle barrel pressed under his nephew's chin. "Apologize to my wife." "Or what?" Cornelius wheezed, but there was triumph in his eyes. "You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses? That would certainly ensure the ranch goes to me, Uncle. Murder tends to invalidate wills." Magnolia descended the porch steps, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, protective and fierce. Every word Cornelius had spoken was designed to wound her, to resurrect every doubt and shame she'd been carrying since Philadelphia. But standing there in the Montana morning, feeling the subtle changes in her body that she'd been too terrified to acknowledge, something in her shifted. She'd spent 28 years believing she was broken, believing her body was wrong, inadequate, incapable of the most fundamental female function. But Silas had spent 3 months showing her different, 3 months claiming her with absolute certainty that she could give him what he needed. And now, with life possibly growing inside her, Magnolia made a choice. She chose to believe her body, to trust what it was telling her, to stand in her truth even if it terrified her. "I'm carrying Silas's child," she said clearly, her voice ringing across the ranch yard. "I'm 6 weeks late. I'm sick every morning. My body is changing in ways that can only mean one thing. And in 6 months, when I deliver a healthy baby, you'll never touch this land." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thornwood, I would need to conduct a thorough examination to verify. You're not touching her." Silas released Cornelius, but didn't lower the rifle. "My wife has spoken. I've spoken. If you need more proof than that, you can wait 6 months like everyone else." Cornelius straightened his collar, his face mottled with rage. "This isn't over. When she loses that baby, if she's even actually pregnant, when her defective body fails the way Philadelphia predicted, I'll be there to claim what's rightfully mine. Get off my land." Each word from Silas was a separate threat, and even Cornelius had enough self-preservation to recognize genuine danger when he heard it. As the 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, leaving dust and implied threats in their wake, Magnolia felt Silas's arm come around her waist, pulling her against his side. They stood there together, watching until the riders disappeared over the ridge, and then Silas turned her to face him. "He's going to try something," Magnolia said quietly. He's too desperate, too close to losing everything. Whatever he does next will be dangerous. Let him try. Silas's hand covered hers where it still rested protectively on her belly. We're stronger than he is. You're stronger than he is, and I will burn this entire ranch to the ground before I let him hurt you or our baby. Magnolia looked up at this man she'd married sight unseen, this rancher who'd sent her a brutally honest telegram and then spent 3 months proving that his intensity came from passion rather than cruelty. Somewhere along the way, between that first night and this morning's confrontation, the arrangement had shifted into something real, something that looked dangerously like love. I'm scared, she admitted, not of Cornelius, of failing you, of my body betraying. Your body is perfect. Silas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. And even if, God forbid, something happens, even if we lose this baby, we keep trying, we keep fighting, we don't give up. That's what being Montana timber means, Maggie. We bend in the storms, but we don't break. And standing there in the morning light, Magnolia felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that matched Silas's own. Whatever came next, whether Cornelius's threats escalated, whether her body proved Philadelphia right or wrong, whether the next 6 months brought triumph or heartbreak, she wouldn't face it alone. She had a partner, a husband, a man who looked at her giant frame and saw strength instead of defect. That was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. And if Cornelius Thornwood thought he could steal it away, he was about to learn exactly how fierce a Montana mama bear could be. Spring came to Montana territory like a promise fulfilled, painting the endless landscape in gold and green while snow still clung to the distant mountain peaks. Magnolia Thornwood stood at the bedroom window, one hand pressed to her swollen belly where their daughter, because somehow she knew it was a daughter, kicked with enthusiastic strength. 8.5 months had passed since that confrontation with Cornelius, 8.5 months of growing larger while the threats grew quieter, but more dangerous. The pregnancy had been difficult. Not in the ways Philadelphia predicted. Her body had embraced this new life with stubborn determination, growing strong rather than fragile, but in the constant vigilance required to keep herself and the baby safe. Cornelius had tried everything. Poisoned feed that killed 3 horses before Silas discovered it. An accidental stampede that nearly trampled Magnolia while she was hanging laundry. Mysterious fires that consumed the hay barn and came dangerously close to the main house. Each attack was designed to look like misfortune, like the harsh realities of ranch life. But Magnolia and Silas knew better. Now, with her due date days away and Cornelius's 6-month deadline long past, the attacks had stopped. The silence was somehow more terrifying than the violence had been, because they both knew Cornelius Thornwood was planning something final, something that would either secure his inheritance or destroy him trying. A contraction rippled through Magnolia's belly, strong enough to make her gasp and grip the windowsill. Not the first today. They'd been coming since dawn, irregular but insistent, her body preparing for the battle ahead. She should tell Silas, should send for Mrs. Jessup and the midwife Ayanna, who'd been staying in the guest room this past week. But something kept her silent, some instinct that whispered danger was coming, and she needed to be ready to fight rather than vulnerable in childbed. The sound of breaking glass downstairs confirmed her instinct. Magnolia moved as quickly as her swollen body allowed, reaching for the loaded pistol Silas had insisted she keep within arm's reach at all times. Another contraction hit halfway down the stairs and she had to pause, breathing through the pain, one hand on her belly and the other gripping the weapon. In the front parlor, Cornelius Thornwood stood amid shattered window glass, a revolver in his hand and madness in his eyes. He was gaunt to the point of skeletal, his expensive suit hanging on his frame like a scarecrow's clothes. 3 months of watching his inheritance slip away had broken something fundamental in him. "Where's my uncle?" he demanded, the gun shaking in his grip. "In the north pasture," Magnolia lied, though Silas was actually in the barn not 50 yards away, checking the spring calves. "Liar." Cornelius's laugh was unhinged. "You think I'm stupid? I've been watching this house for weeks. I know his patterns. I know he never leaves you alone this close to your time. So where is he really?" Another contraction gripped Magnolia, stronger this time, and she couldn't quite hide the pain that flashed across her face. Cornelius's eyes widened, then narrowed with calculation. "You're in labor," he breathed. "That's why you're alone. He went to get the midwife, which means—" his smile was terrible. "Which means I have you exactly where I want you, helpless, vulnerable, about to give birth to the heir that steals everything from me." Magnolia raised the pistol with both hands, her arms steady despite the contraction still rippling through her. Get out of this house, Cornelius, while you still can. Or what? You'll shoot me. He took a step closer. You're about to have a baby, you oversized freak. You can barely stand. You think you can... The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Magnolia's bullet took a chunk out of the doorframe 6 inches from Cornelius's head, close enough that he felt the heat of its passage. His face went white. The next one goes through your skull, Magnolia said quietly. I'm a giant, remember? Strong enough to handle recoil even in labor. Strong enough to defend what's mine. Now get out, or I'll make sure the only inheritance you get is a pine box. For a moment, Cornelius stood frozen, his own weapon still pointed vaguely in her direction. Then, his face twisted, with rage and desperation, and Magnolia saw him make his choice. Saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Saw the exact moment he decided that if he couldn't have the ranch, no one would. Time seemed to slow. Magnolia's finger was already squeezing her own trigger when the barn door exploded open and Silas came through it like an avenging angel, his rifle raised. The 2 shots, hers and Silas's, came so close together they sounded like one. Cornelius's revolver flew from his hand, his shoulder and knee erupting in blood where their bullets found him. He went down screaming, writhing on the parlor floor among the broken glass. Silas was beside Magnolia in seconds, taking the pistol from her shaking hands, his eyes wild with fear and fury. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Is the baby? I'm fine, Magnolia gasped, but even as she said it, another contraction hit, this one so powerful it drove her to her knees. Fluid gushed between her thighs, soaking through her dress. But the baby's coming. Now. Mrs. Jessup appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with practiced calm that only a woman who'd survived 30 Montana winters could muster. Get him out of here, she ordered, gesturing at the bleeding Cornelius. Lock him in the root cellar and send someone for the sheriff. Then you, she pointed at Silas, help me get your wife upstairs. This baby's not waiting for anyone. The next hours were pain and effort and the primal work of bringing life into the world. Magnolia labored with the same fierce determination she brought to Tedu. Everything else, her strong body doing what Philadelphia had sworn, was impossible. Silas stayed beside her the entire time, letting her crush his hands during contractions, whispering encouragement and love and promises about their future. When their daughter finally emerged with a lusty cry that rattled the window panes, when Ayanna placed the squalling perfect baby on Magnolia's chest, the sound that escaped Silas was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She's here, he whispered, touching their daughter's tiny hand with reverent fingers. Our girl, our heir, our everything. Magnolia looked down at the baby, impossibly small, impossibly perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that promised she'd inherited both parents' stubborn will, and felt something complete inside her. All the years of being told she was wrong, broken, too much, all of it vanished in the face of this tiny miracle. Her body had done exactly what it was built to do, had proven Philadelphia wrong, had given Silas his heir and secured the ranch and created something more precious than any inheritance. Rebecca, Magnolia said, remembering the name they'd chosen together. Rebecca Magnolia Thornwood, so she knows she comes from strength. Silas kissed his wife's forehead, then his daughter's, his weathered face wet with tears. Montana timber, he agreed. Both of you, my whole heart. 2 weeks later, when the sheriff finally arrived to collect Cornelius, who'd sung like a canary about every attempt on their lives once infection set into his wounds and he realized he was facing the gallows, Silas stood on the porch with Rebecca sleeping against his shoulder. The lawyer who'd accompanied Cornelius on that fateful morning visit appeared as well, this time bearing documents that officially recognized Rebecca as legitimate heir to the Thornwood Ranch. Your nephew has confessed to attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy, the sheriff said, tipping his hat respectfully. He'll hang most likely, or spend the rest of his life in territorial prison. Silas felt no satisfaction in his nephew's fate, only relief that the threat was finally ended. What happens to his claim on the ranch? Void, the lawyer confirmed. Your daughter's birth fulfilled all terms of your will. The ranch is secured for her and any future children you might have. Congratulations, Mr. Thornwood. You've won. But when Silas turned to find Magnolia standing in the doorway, her body still recovering from childbirth, but her eyes fierce and proud and full of love, he knew the truth. They'd both won. The giant mail-order bride and the desperate rancher had built something neither expected when they'd agreed to that brutally honest arrangement. They'd built a family, a legacy, a love that would outlast any threat Montana could throw at them. Magnolia crossed to them, taking Rebecca from Silas's arms and pressing her lips to their daughter's forehead. "Tell her," she said softly. "Tell our girl what she needs to know about where she comes from." Silas wrapped his arms around both of them, his wife and daughter, his entire world contained in this moment on a Montana porch. "You come from strength," he whispered to Rebecca, though she was too young to understand. From a mother who was told she was broken, but proved the whole world wrong. From a father who refused to give up even when time was running out. You come from Montana timber, the kind that bends in storms but never breaks, the kind that grows stronger in harsh soil, the kind that lasts forever. And there, surrounded by endless prairie and snow-capped mountains, with spring wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and possibility, the Thornwood family stood together. The ranch that had almost been lost was saved. The heir that everyone said was impossible was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. And the mail order arrangement that started with a brutally honest telegram had transformed into something neither Silas nor Magnolia had dared hope for. It had become love, real, lasting, powerful love, the kind worth fighting for, the kind worth building a legacy on, the kind that would echo through generations of Thornwoods yet to come, all of them carrying the story of the giant bride and the rancher who saw her strength when the rest of the world saw only difference. 5 years later, when Rebecca was joined by twin boys, Joseph and Samuel, who inherited their mother's size and their father's stubbornness, Magnolia would stand in this same spot and remember that first telegram. Remember the terror and hope of boarding a train to marry a stranger. Remember the moment Silas's hands covered hers on sun-warmed stone, and he'd made her a promise that changed everything. "Open your legs," he'd said. "I will only stop when my child is in your womb." He'd kept that promise. But more than that, he'd given her something Philadelphia never could. He'd given her proof that she was exactly enough, that her body was capable of miracles, that being too much for some people just meant you were perfect for the right one. And as Magnolia watched her daughter toddle across the porch, as she felt the twins growing strong inside her, as she met Silas's eyes and saw forever reflected there, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd chosen right. They'd both chosen right, and the legacy they were building, brick by brick, baby by baby, year by year, would outlast anything Montana could throw at them. Because they were Montana timber, and Montana timber never breaks. The end. We want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this story from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. We love knowing our Montana timber family spans the globe. And if this story touched your heart, if Magnolia and Silas's journey made you believe in second chances and the power of choosing strength over shame, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We bring you powerful Western romance stories every week. Stories about mail-order brides, frontier justice, cowboys who aren't afraid to fight for love, and women who prove the world wrong. Your support means everything to us. Subscribe now, and let's build this community together. Because just like Magnolia and Silas, we're stronger together than we ever could be alone. Until next time, stay strong, stay fierce, stay Montana timber.